Shalom, friends, and welcome to Walking the Ancient Path, where we journey back into the language, landscape, and life rhythms of the Scriptures in a lighter, more accessible way, exploring the world of the Bible as its original listeners would have experienced it. I'm your host, Sully, joined by our trusted companions, Deacon, our scholar of ancient Hebrew thought, and Hope, a storyteller who seems to walk right out of the hills of Judea. Today, we'll start our in-depth exploration of the entire book of Galatians, verse by verse, and unpack each passage within the context of organic ancient Hebrew thought, formatted like a living Hebrew commentary. The verse will be presented directly with the text from the Textus Receptus New Testament manuscript translated into English, for reference, retelling it through concrete Hebrew thought patterns and symbols, and follow up with imagery notes. Before we begin, let's identify who Paul was writing to and examine the cultural and religious landscape.
The letter to the Galatians stands among the earliest breaths of Paul's writings, carried on dusty roads in the middle of the first century. It was not written to one single clan in a single town, but to a whole region, a rugged stretch of central Anatolia called Galatia. These hills and valleys were home to a mingling of peoples, the descendants of Celtic tribes who had long ago settled in the land, Jewish families scattered in exile but still gathered in their synagogues, and Gentiles drawn to the hope of Israel's Elohim. They lived at the crossroads of empires where Roman law pressed down from above, Greek philosophy seeped in from the schools, and tribal customs lingered in the villages. Yet even in this swirl of influences, the ancient Hebrew scriptures still breathed through the scrolls in the synagogues, and now the gospel of Yeshua the Anointed was spreading like fire among them.
Paul's letter rises with urgency. News had reached him that these young believers, once kindled by trust in the Anointed, were beginning to sway under the pressure of teachers who insisted that valid covenant membership required the full weight of circumcision and ritual observance. To Paul, this was not a small matter of practice. It was a threat to the very heart of the gospel. He was well aware of the ancient sign of the covenant given to Abraham, the mark of the flesh cut. Yet he also knew the deeper promise that the seed of Abraham would bring blessing to all nations. That seed, Paul insists, has now sprouted in Yeshua, the Mashiach, Anointed One. And it is not the knife of man, but the breath of Yahweh that marks out the children of the promise.
The imagery of Galatians is strong and earthy. Paul speaks as a father of the clan, pleading with his children not to leave the well-trodden path of freedom, to stumble back into the nets of slavery. He paints contrasts with bold strokes between family and outsider, between sons of the tent and slaves of the household, between fruit ripened by the Ruach and barren works born of fleshly striving. He calls to mind the promise to Abraham beneath the stars, the inheritance waiting for children grown to maturity, the Etz, the tree of execution, where the Anointed hung up the curse and broke its hold. Again and again, he sets before them the trail of freedom, not weighed down by yokes of law-keeping as a means of worth, but walked upright with the wind of Yahweh filling their lungs.
Unlike the tenderness that flows through 1 Thessalonians, this letter carries a sharper tone. Paul writes with the voice of a shepherd crying out as his sheep draw near the cliff's edge. His words sting because his love burns. Beneath every rebuke is covenant loyalty, a refusal to let the Galatians trade the joy of freedom for the chains of bondage. To enter Galatians is to enter the clash of covenant visions, to hear Paul contend not with detached philosophy, but with the passion of one who has seen the face of the risen Anointed and cannot allow his children to be torn from that living trail.
Perfect. Let's start our in-depth exploration of the entire book of Galatians, the same way we did 1 Thessalonians, and unpack each passage within the context of organic ancient Hebrew thought. Here's how we'll format it, so it's like a living Hebrew commentary. First, I'll quote the verse. Direct text from the Textus Receptus New Testament manuscript translated into English for reference.
Second, I'll provide an ancient Hebrew imagery rendering, retelling it through concrete Hebrew thought patterns and symbols.
Finally, I will follow up with imagery notes providing background on the cultural and/or linguistic imagery.
So, let's start our informal, informational, clearing the murky into clear water walk with Chapter 1.
Verse 1, referenced from the Textus Receptus manuscript rendered in English. Paul, an apostle, not of men, neither by man but by Jesus Christ, and God the Father, who raised him from the dead.
Verse 1 in ancient Hebrew imagery rendering. Shaul, a shaliach, a sent one, sent not by the hands of men, nor through the voice of any human chief, but through Yeshua the Anointed King, and through Yahweh the Father, the one who lifted him up from the dust of death.
Here are imagery notes of verse 1, Paul. Paul had both a Hebrew name, Shaul, and a Greek-Roman name, Paulos. This was common among Jews in the diaspora during the 1st century, allowing him to minister effectively both within Jewish circles and in the broader Greco-Roman world. In this letter, the name carries the echo of his covenant roots, even as he walks among Gentiles. Apostle. In Hebrew, an apostle is a shaliach, which is a clan function, one sent forth as the arm of another's authority, carrying the full weight of the sender's word, like a son entrusted with the seal of his father's house. Not of men, nor by man. Paul denies any human commissioning. In Hebrew thought, this is like saying that no elder's council tied cords around him, nor did any tribal chief place him on the trail. His authority is not a man-made cloak he wears, but a direct sending from the Anointed himself. But by Jesus Christ, through Yeshua the Anointed King, drawing on the ancient imagery of kings and priests anointed with oil to be set apart for covenant purpose. God the Father, Yahweh the Father. The covenant clan imagery of Father emphasizes both source and authority. Yahweh is not an abstract deity, but the clan head who gives inheritance, who raised him from the dead, in Hebrew imagery, who lifted him from the dust of death. Death is not an abstract void, but the dust of the grave, the pit of silence. Resurrection is Yahweh's strong hand reaching down to lift the anointed from that grave into life again, setting him upright as the living heir.
Verse 2, and all the brethren which are with me unto the churches of Galatia.
And with me are all the brothers of the clan, those bound together in the covenant, writing to the gatherings of the Kahal scattered through Galatia.
All the brethren, not just a casual term, but a literal clan reference. Achim, brothers, signifies those bound by covenant blood and a loyal bond, whether through biological family or spiritual kinship. In Hebrew imagery, brothers are like stones built side by side in the same wall, each bearing the other's weight, which are with me. Paul's voice is not solitary. This reflects the communal way of Hebrew teaching. Words are passed not as isolated sparks, but as fire from one hearth to another. Unto the churches, the Greek term ecclesias translates to the Hebrew kahal, which means the gathering of people called together under Yahweh's name. This is not a building of stone and wood, but a community assembled like tents surrounding a fire. Of Galatia, these gatherings are spread across the rugged plateau of central Anatolia. Some are Jewish-rooted, others Gentile-rooted, all united under one covenant family. To mention them together is to picture scattered flocks gathered beneath their shepherd's staff.
We'll pause here and continue in our next chat.
If you listeners have areas of interest you'd like to explore further, questions, or comments, please don't hesitate to let us know.